12-year-old girl fixes CEO's Bentley. He's shocked when he sees what's around her neck. She was just a 12-year-old girl fixing cars in a forgotten town, until the day she repaired a billionaire's broken Bentley and uncovered a system that had ignored kids like her for generations. Riley Mae Thomas didn't just rebuild an engine. She ignited a revolution. This is a story of how one girl, a toolbox, and an unstoppable spirit took on corporate giants and rewrote the future for thousands. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that move your heart and open your eyes. Nathan Caldwell had built his life on precision. As CEO of Caldwell Engineering, one of America's premier industrial manufacturing firms, he didn't tolerate failure, especially not from machines. So, when his custom Bentley Continental GT stuttered and hissed on a dusty West Virginia back road, belching steam like a wounded dragon, he reacted with the incredulous rage of a man who couldn't believe the universe dared inconvenience him. He stepped out, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that didn't belong in the rural hills, tapping his phone to check signal strength. 1 bar. Maybe 2 if he held it skyward and whispered prayers to a god he hadn't spoken to since college. The humid Appalachian air clung to him as he scowled at the car's gleaming hood, now radiating failure. Caldwell's assistant was unreachable. His backup driver was stuck in traffic somewhere on I-64, and the keynote address he was supposed to deliver at the Appalachian Tech Summit in Charleston was ticking away like a bad stock option. "German engineering," he muttered. "British, actually," came a voice behind him. He turned. At first, Nathan thought he was hallucinating. Standing 10 feet away was a girl, no more than 12, dressed in coveralls 2 sizes too big, with a long smear of grease across one cheek and a socket wrench slung over her shoulder like a badge of honor. Her brown curls were tied back under a faded baseball cap, and her boots looked older than she was. "Bentley's British," she said, squinting at him with a level stare. "Though the engine's based on a German W12 block, VW heritage, probably your high-pressure fuel pump." Nathan blinked. "Who are you?" "Riley Mae Thomas," she said, stepping forward and circling the Bentley like it was a patient on an operating table. "You're 3 miles from Fairpoint. I was helping my grandpa at the shop when we heard the engine noise. Figured someone needed help." "Help?" he repeated, watching her kneel down and tap a hose with her knuckle. "You?" She looked up at him. "You want to make it to Charleston or stand here looking pretty?" The question caught him off guard, so much so that he forgot to object when she popped the hood and leaned in with an ease that suggested she'd done this 1,000 times before. Nathan followed reluctantly, more out of curiosity than hope. 3 licensed mechanics in D.C. hadn't been able to isolate the issue. He highly doubted a preteen could, but then she spoke. "Priming pump's working. That hiss when you tried to start? That's pressure loss, not misfire. Bet you filled up at a backwoods station about 50 miles ago." Nathan blinked. "Yes. Why?" "Seen it before. Bad ethanol mix clogs the filters. Your high-pressure pump can't generate the PSI the injection system needs. She's starving." "And you figured that out? How?" She shrugged. "I listened." Riley's fingers moved with precise confidence through the maze of wires and tubing. She wasn't just playing mechanic. She was fluent in the language of engines, diagnosing issues not by code readers or manuals, but by sound, smell, and feel. Nathan stood back and stared. It wasn't just her competence that unnerved him. It was the calm, almost reverent way she moved. Like the car wasn't just a machine but something alive, misunderstood, needing someone to hear its cries. As she leaned deeper under the hood, the thin chain around her neck swung free, revealing 2 rings, a Marine Corps signet and a Purple Heart, both far too large for her fingers. He didn't need to ask. "They were my dad's," she said, catching him looking. Her voice didn't waver. "He died in Iraq when I was 7. Grandpa says the rings are reminders of duty and grit." Nathan said nothing. Something in his chest, long calloused by boardroom wars and stock market pressures, stirred. "Your grandfather's a mechanic?" "He's everything," she said with a small smile. "Hank Thomas, served in Vietnam, taught me engines when I was barely tall enough to see over the hood." A battered tow truck rumbled up the road behind them. Hank stepped out, a wiry man with snow-white hair and the kind of posture only Marines and stubborn mountain folk carried past 70. He wore a Stafford auto repair shirt and the weathered look of someone who'd earned his keep every day for 5 decades. "Everything okay?" he called. "She's got it," Nathan said before he could stop himself. Hank raised a brow but said nothing, just watched as Riley leaned back, brushed her hands on a rag, and said, "I can jerry-rig a temporary fix. We've got a spare electric pump from an old Civic in the truck. Might not be elegant, but it'll get you to Charleston. You want me to let a 12-year-old rewire my $300,000 vehicle with salvage parts?" "I'm offering you a choice," Riley said. "You can sit here arguing with me or be on the road in 20 minutes. Your call, mister." Nathan stared at her. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried over the ridgeline. The heat shimmered off the pavement, the hills green and unmoved by his indecision. "Do it," and she did. The next 20 minutes passed like an orchestral performance. Hank passed tools, Riley worked quickly, testing voltage, routing fuel lines, and making crimp connections like she was playing the violin. She explained each step as she went, not for his benefit, but because she believed the process mattered. When it was done, she stepped back. "Try it." Nathan climbed in, heart halfway in his throat. The Bentley sputtered, then roared to life, smoother than it had sounded in weeks. He revved it gently. The engine purred. He stepped out, stunned. "How?" "Pressure's stable," she said. "It's not a permanent fix. Drive easy. You'll get there." Nathan reached for his wallet, pulling out a thick stack of bills. Hank stepped between them. "65. That's our rate." Nathan blinked. "That's all?" "Riley's time ain't for sale," Hank said evenly. "But under our shop's name, we charge honest work at honest prices." For a moment, Nathan stood in the middle of a gravel pull-off in the Appalachian Hills, clutching a $100 bill, confronted by a reality he'd forgotten existed. People who fixed things not for profit, but for purpose. A child who knew more about integrity than many executives he'd mentored. He handed Hank the money. "Keep the change." Riley didn't say much as she packed up, but Nathan noticed how her fingers lingered briefly on the chain around her neck. The rings, the past. He cleared his throat. "Thank you." She looked up at him. "Just remember who helped you when the suits couldn't." As they drove away in opposite directions, he toward Charleston, she toward the garage, Nathan Caldwell glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her standing at the roadside. Small, steady, unshakable. And in that moment, the man who'd built empires from precision engineering realized he'd just met someone who could dismantle his world, with a wrench and a truth he hadn't seen coming. The next morning, Riley Mae Thomas was already elbow-deep in the hood of a '96 Dodge Ram when the town began to whisper. Fairpoint was the kind of place where news moved faster than the internet, carried by waitresses pouring coffee at the diner, farmers swapping stories over feed sacks, or Mrs. Caldwell's poodle-walking group who never missed a beat. And this time it wasn't just about the girl who fixed a Bentley. It was about who she had fixed it for, Nathan Caldwell. The Nathan Caldwell. The man behind half the auto parts Fairpoint residents unwittingly installed in their vehicles. The billionaire CEO who had, until yesterday, probably never set foot on a cracked back road like Ridge Hollow. And now he had a story. One that featured a 12-year-old grease monkey and a gravel lot miracle. Riley didn't care much for gossip. She cared about getting old engines to purr again, about socket wrenches that fit right, and about the particular knock that meant something was just one breath away from falling apart. But that morning, even she noticed the looks, half awe, half curiosity, as people slowed their pickups driving past Stafford Auto Repair. Her grandpa, Hank, was pretending not to notice, but she caught him grumbling under his breath as he sorted invoices. At 10:17 a.m., the first call came. It wasn't a customer. Hank listened for a while, his face darkening in increments. "We've got nothing to hide," he said at last and hung up. Riley straightened from under the Ram's hood and wiped her hands on a rag. "What's wrong?" "Child Protective Services," he said flatly. The words hit her like a punch. "Why?" "They got an anonymous tip. Someone reported that a minor, meaning you, was performing mechanical work in a hazardous environment without proper supervision." His jaw clenched. "They want to schedule a visit. Said it's just protocol." Riley's mind spun. They'd been working together in that garage since she was 7. She had her own gloves, her own goggles, her own toolbox. Grandpa never let her near the welding torch or anything truly dangerous. And besides, she was better trained than most tech school graduates. Everyone in town knew that. Everyone trusted them. Except, apparently, someone didn't. Riley glanced down at her hands. Black under the fingernails, scraped from removing rusted clamps. Hands of a mechanic, hands of a soldier's daughter. "Who would do that?" she whispered. Hank didn't answer, but his eyes were storm clouds. Meanwhile, several hundred miles away, in a sleek conference room atop Caldwell Tower in Pittsburgh, Cynthia Shore adjusted her pearl necklace and reviewed the morning's legal risk reports. The girl had gone viral, in a small-town sort of way. There were photos. A blurry one of Riley leaning under the Bentley's hood had made it to a car enthusiast blog, and now several mid-tier news outlets were sniffing for an angle. Cynthia tapped her pen against the table. "We have a situation." Marcus Delgado, head of corporate security and former Army Ranger, raised a brow. "You mean the girl who fixed the car?" "This is a PR vulnerability," Cynthia said. "A child mechanic. No permits, no safety protocol. If someone decides to spin this—" "She fixed the CEO's car," Marcus cut in, "and saved his keynote. That's a win, not a risk." "Only if it stays local," Cynthia countered. "If this spreads, and activist groups catch wind, we could be accused of endorsing child labor. Our brand is precision, compliance, responsibility." Marcus leaned back, his face unreadable. "You're suggesting we distance ourselves from a 12-year-old girl who bailed our boss out of an embarrassing roadside breakdown?" "I'm suggesting we take preemptive measures to ensure we aren't linked to anything that could be interpreted incorrectly." Her tone was crisp. "I've already placed an anonymous call to child services in the region, quietly, no names." "You weaponized CPS?" "I managed reputational risk," she said coldly. "Our priority is protecting the company. That means the board, the shareholders, and Mr. Caldwell himself." Marcus didn't respond, but in his chest something tightened. He didn't like this, not at all. Back in Fairpoint, Riley's quiet day was unraveling. Word spread faster than even the complaint had. By noon, Mrs. Delaney from the bakery stopped by with a box of blueberry muffins, just in case, and a hug that lingered longer than usual. Pastor Neil from the local church sent a text to Hank. "Let me know if you need character witnesses." Even Alejandro, the 17-year-old part-timer who used to roll his eyes at Riley's advice, stood a little straighter when she passed by. But still, the anxiety grew like a slow fire. Riley couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, judged. Like every wrench she picked up was now a potential violation. Like everything she loved about her life was suddenly fragile. "Grandpa," she said that evening as they sat on the back porch, "they could take me away, couldn't they?" Hank stared out at the hills, his hand wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. "They'd have to go through me first." She nodded, but she knew. Systems didn't care about good intentions. Systems cared about boxes checked, protocols followed, lines not crossed. "What if someone powerful is behind this?" she asked. Hank turned to her slowly. "You think that man, Caldwell, had something to do with it?" She shrugged. "Maybe not him, but someone around him, someone who didn't like how it looked. A rich guy's car breaking down and a kid in coveralls saving him with spare parts." Hank grunted. "Some people think dignity only comes in suits." The next morning, Detective Kim Allen knocked on the garage door just as Riley was diagnosing a faulty starter in a Saturn that sounded like it coughed ghosts. The detective was quiet, sharp-eyed, and respected throughout the county. She didn't come unless something mattered. She stepped into Hank's office and closed the door. Riley eavesdropped through the air vent in the garage wall, as she'd done 100 times when her grandpa argued with parts suppliers or town inspectors. "I know you've got a visit scheduled," Alan said, "and I know you're not the kind of man who'd ever exploit a child, especially not your own granddaughter." "Appreciate that," Hank said. "But the report came from a 412 area code, Pittsburgh," she continued, "and the language was clinical. Like it was written by someone who understands how to trigger inspections without looking like they're causing trouble." "Corporate," Hank muttered. "Looks that way," Kim confirmed. "I've seen it before. Anonymous reports filed after some CEO gets embarrassed in public. Companies try to scrub the narrative clean before the press gets involved." Riley pressed her forehead to the wall, fury and fear mixing in her gut. "They don't want her to be a hero," Hank said. "They want her to disappear." "They'll regret underestimating her," Kim said, and Riley felt something new stir. Not just anger, but strategy. She spent the rest of the day researching. Not engines, not torque specs, but power. How corporate reputations were protected, how companies deflected criticism, and most importantly, how truth could be drowned by bureaucracy unless someone fought smart. At dinner, she looked up from her plate. "We're not waiting around to be judged. We're fighting back." Hank raised a brow. "How?" "We show them we're more than some poor mechanic and his kid apprentice. We show them we've got the town, the facts, the truth, and then we find out who really made that call, and we make sure they can't do it to anyone else." Hank smiled slowly. "Your father would have said the same thing." And across the state, as night fell over Pittsburgh's polished skyline, Nathan Caldwell stared out his penthouse window, unsettled. Something about the way that girl had looked at him, unafraid, unwavering, still haunted him. He didn't know yet that trouble had already started brewing in his own house, but soon he'd be forced to choose between the empire he'd built and the truth a 12-year-old girl refused to let die in silence. Monday morning arrived with a cloudless sky and a strange tension in the air, the kind that settled over small towns just before something important, something irrevocable, was about to happen. Riley stood at the kitchen counter in the apartment above Stafford Auto Repair, pouring cereal into a chipped bowl, while Grandpa Hank sipped his coffee with a little more caution than usual. Neither of them had spoken much since Friday, and neither had to. The CPS visit was scheduled for 9 a.m., and every ticking second felt like it carried the weight of a hammer poised mid-swing. Downstairs, the shop had been scrubbed until the grease-stained floor looked as close to respectable as concrete could manage. Every toolbox was shut, every chemical container labeled. Riley's schoolwork had been laid out on the desk in Hank's office, next to neatly organized safety manuals and a folder of her vaccination records. There were even printouts from her online math course annotated with her own scribbled notes and formulas. She had spent Sunday trying to act normal, tuning a carburetor here, helping Pastor Neil with his old pickup, but every task had felt like walking on a bridge she wasn't sure was finished. Would the inspector understand? Would they even care? When the knock came at 8:59, Riley didn't jump. She'd been bracing for it since sunrise. Hank opened the door. Standing there was a woman in her mid-40s, wiry and sharp-edged with thin glasses, a clipboard, and the weary eyes of someone used to being mistrusted. "Sandra Mitchell," she said. "Child Protective Services." "Come on in," Hank said with practiced calm. "This is my granddaughter, Riley." Mitchell gave a polite nod. Riley met her gaze with quiet steadiness, but she could already tell what kind of visit this would be. Not friendly, not neutral, procedural, like Mitchell had already decided something and just needed boxes checked to make it official. "We'll begin with a walkthrough," Mitchell said, glancing around the office. "I'd like to see the living quarters first." They started upstairs. The apartment was small but clean. Modest furniture, a bookshelf filled with both auto repair manuals and paperback novels, and a wall of photos. Hank in uniform, Riley's father in his marine dress blues, Riley as a toddler holding a wrench almost as big as her arm. "Who oversees her schooling?" Mitchell asked. "She's enrolled online through the state's hybrid program," Hank replied. "We have documentation." "And she's supervised when working in the shop?" "Always. And she's never allowed near welding or paint systems, only diagnostics, parts replacement, and light tool work." Mitchell made notes with tight, quick strokes. Once downstairs, she moved through the shop like an insurance adjuster, tapping shelves with her pen and pausing with faint disapproval at the faint oil smell that clung to everything like a signature. "This seems like a dangerous environment for a child," she said as they passed the lift bay. "I'm not allowed to operate the lift," Riley said calmly. "And I always wear goggles and gloves. Grandpa taught me safety first, always." Mitchell stopped beside a tool cart. "Riley, I'd like to speak with you privately now." Hank opened his mouth, but Riley put a hand on his arm. "It's okay." They moved back upstairs. Riley sat across from Mitchell at the small kitchen table, her spine straight and her heart pounding like a piston under pressure. "Riley," Mitchell began, "can you tell me what your average day looks like?" Riley answered clearly. "School in the morning, shop in the afternoon, homework after dinner, church on Sundays, weekly safety reviews." She explained the protocols Hank had taught her, the boundaries they maintained, the fact that she had never been hurt, not even a scratch. "Do you ever feel pressured to work in the garage?" Mitchell asked. "No, ma'am. Don't you think a 12-year-old should be playing instead of working with mechanical tools?" Riley paused. "I do play. I also fix things. I like knowing how things work. And fixing cars helps people, especially around here." Mitchell tapped her pen. "Some people believe children your age shouldn't be exposed to industrial chemicals." Riley inhaled slowly. "I've read all the safety data sheets. I know how to handle materials. I don't use anything without gloves and ventilation. It's part of the job, part of learning." The inspector's expression didn't shift. She was a vault, a human algorithm trained to reduce stories to risks and patterns. "What would you say," Mitchell asked, "to someone who believes you're being exploited?" "I'd say they've never met my grandpa," Riley replied, "and they don't know me." Mitchell didn't smile. She just scribbled something and stood. "I'll be filing my report within 10 business days." Riley walked her to the door. "Thank you for coming." After she left, Riley sat on the porch stairs and exhaled so slowly it felt like releasing steam from a pressure valve. Hank joined her a moment later. "She say anything?" "She said it'll take 10 days. "Which means someone will know in 5, he muttered. "Bureaucracy always leaks in 2 directions." They sat in silence for a long time. Then Hank said, "You handled yourself like a professional." Riley didn't answer. She was still staring at the street, specifically at the black SUV parked across from the shop, just far enough to be subtle but close enough to be watching. "You see that?" she asked. Hank followed her gaze. His eyes narrowed. From behind the tinted glass, a woman stepped out and crossed the road. She was tall, composed, dressed in a slate-gray suit, and carried a leather briefcase. Her auburn hair was tied back in a neat braid. "Good morning," she said as she approached. "I'm Elise Caldwell." Riley stood slowly. "Caldwell? Like—" "Yes," Elise said gently. "Nathan is my father." Hank's jaw tightened. "You, with CPS?" "No. I'm a licensed child welfare specialist. I work with independent foster advocacy groups and am currently conducting a private review. When my father told me what happened on the highway, I did some research. Then I heard about the CPS report." Riley didn't hide her suspicion. "So why are you here?" "Because I believe someone filed that report not out of concern, but out of fear. Fear that you're too visible, too smart, too inconvenient. I've seen this before, when power meets the unexpected and doesn't like what it sees." "You think your father knew?" Hank asked. "No," Elise said. "He's not a saint, but he doesn't play dirty behind closed doors. I bet my credentials this came from his legal department." Riley tilted her head. "Then what do we do about it? We document everything. We gather statements, medical records, community support. And then, Elise looked toward the SUV, where a man in a crisp black shirt sat behind the wheel, watching closely. We find out who's trying to bury this story. You think they'll try to take it further? Riley asked. I think they already have, Elise said. But they didn't count on one thing. What? Elise gave a small smile. You. They didn't count on you fighting back. Riley looked down at her hands, still smudged with grease, still hers. She looked at Hank, then back at Elise. Then, let's give them something they can't ignore. The autumn wind carried the faint scent of motor oil and falling leaves as Riley stood by the garage window, watching the trees across the street surrender to the season. It had been 3 days since Sandra Mitchell's visit, and still no word. No decision, no peace. Each hour felt like a string pulled tighter around her chest, one that could snap with a single phone call. But something else had arrived in that silence. Momentum. And Riley, despite her age, had learned that when you couldn't control a storm, you built your shelter with purpose. She had spent those 3 days gathering letters from community members, organizing statements from former customers, and even recording a video message, just in case things went further than anyone expected. She had also, on Elise Caldwell's advice, started documenting everything: dates, times, statements, and suspicious events. It was Thursday afternoon when Buck Reynolds showed up. The rumble of his ancient Chevy truck was unmistakable, a mechanical cough that announced his arrival with all the grace of a gravel avalanche. He stepped out slowly, a man whose joints remembered wars long past and whose conscience had begun stirring in recent nights. He carried a 6-pack of root beer under one arm and a look on his face that suggested this wasn't a casual visit. Hank met him at the doorway with a wary expression. "Buck." "Need to talk," Buck said, jerking his chin toward Riley, who stood by the engine bay with a torque wrench still in her hand. "She should hear it too." Riley wiped her hands on a rag and joined them in the small break room at the back of the shop, where a table, an old coffee maker, and a bulletin board cluttered with hand-scribbled phone numbers stood as witnesses to dozens of hard days and hard choices. Buck sat, cracked open a bottle, and sighed. "I overheard something. Yesterday. And I can't keep quiet about it." Riley's fingers tightened on the rag in her lap. "I've been doing some equipment maintenance for Caldwell Industries. Part-time," Buck said. "Mostly forklifts and fleet trucks, good money, no drama. But while I was at their HQ in Wheeling, I heard 2 people talking in the logistics office. One was from corporate security, the other from legal. They didn't see me, or maybe they thought I wasn't paying attention. But I heard your name, Riley, more than once." He took a long sip, then leaned forward. "They were talking about containing the situation. The Stafford girl, that's what they called you. Said Nathan Caldwell's association with you could pose legal exposure. One of them, I think the woman's name was Cynthia, said anonymous CPS reports were sometimes strategically necessary." Riley's stomach turned cold. "She said something about public relations," Buck continued, voice tight. "Said if pictures got out of you working on a high-end vehicle, someone could spin it. Make it look like the company was endorsing child labor, mentioned labor unions, media angles, lawsuits. So they decided to protect their image by putting my life on trial," Riley said quietly. Buck looked stricken. "I don't think Nathan knew. From what I heard, they were trying to keep it off his radar. But it gets worse." Hank's expression darkened. "How much worse?" "They're leaning on other businesses," Buck said, and the words came out like something sour he couldn't keep down. "I heard them talking about your shop, about discouraging affiliations. They said contractors who supported you or continued doing business here might find themselves reassigned or reviewed for compliance." "You're saying they're threatening our partners," Hank said slowly. "I'm saying they're trying to strangle your reputation," Buck said. "Quietly, systematically, so you either fold or fade." Riley stood. "They're trying to erase us." Hank was already moving. "Get me a notepad." "What are we going to do?" Riley asked. "We're going to write down every word Buck just said." Hank said. Then we're going to call Detective Allen. Then Elise, and then we're going to show these people what happens when they try to bury the wrong family. 2 hours later, Elise was back in the break room, flipping through the statement Buck had written in his careful, looping cursive. Her jaw was tight, and her eyes flashed with a cold fire Riley hadn't seen before. "They're targeting you through economic pressure," she said. "This isn't just harassment, it's coordinated." "And criminal?" Hank asked. Elise hesitated. "Potentially, if we can prove intent to defame or restrict commerce through intimidation, but without names, emails, or a direct chain of command linking this to Cynthia Shore or anyone else, it's an uphill battle." "What about the guy Buck overheard?" Riley asked. "Corporate security," Buck nodded. "Garrett Powell. Didn't say much, but he didn't look comfortable with what was happening. Former Army. Got a good head." Elise perked up. That might be something. If he's still got a conscience, he might talk. Riley's mind was already racing ahead. "Then I'll talk to him." Elise blinked. "Riley, he works for Caldwell. That could be risky." "He's a veteran," Riley said. "So was my dad. Maybe he'll understand what honor means." Elise looked at Hank, who gave a single, silent nod. She's got the right to ask for the truth. That night, while Hank attended a community meeting about small business protections, Riley sat alone at the shop's computer. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, and the scent of rubber and steel floated through the vents. She found the Caldwell Industries staff directory after 15 minutes of deep clicking through public reports and team bios. Garrett Powell, head of security, office line listed, no direct email. She picked up the phone, took a breath, and dialed. He answered on the third ring. "Garrett Powell." "Mr. Powell," Riley said, gripping the receiver tight, "this is Riley Mae Thomas, from Stafford Auto Repair." Silence. "I believe you know who I am," she added, her voice steady. "And I believe you overheard a conversation last week about me." A long breath on the other end. Then, "Miss Thomas, I'm not sure it's appropriate. I'm not calling to accuse you," she said. "I'm calling because I think you're someone who still believes in doing the right thing. And because Clutch Jenkins says you served." That made him pause. "He did, huh?" "Yes," Riley said. "And so did my dad. He died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. I'm asking if you're willing to do the same thing in a different kind of war." Another pause. Then, quietly, "Where do you want to meet?" The Martinez family diner was half empty when Riley slid into the booth across from Garrett Powell an hour later. He looked like a man with a uniform still pressed into his soul, straight-backed, weather-worn, careful with his words. "You've got courage," he said. "Not many kids would make this call." "I'm not most kids," she replied. "I gathered that." They spoke for nearly an hour. Riley shared what Buck had overheard, what Elise had found, what her family was facing. Powell listened, hands wrapped around a coffee mug he didn't drink from, his eyes darkening with every word. "I didn't sign off on any of it," he finally said. "But I didn't stop it either, and that makes me part of the problem." "Then help us be part of the solution," Riley said. "Help us find proof. Help us show the truth." He looked up and something shifted behind his eyes. "I'll see what I can find," he said. "But be careful. Corporations don't like being cornered, especially not by 12-year-olds with the truth in their pocket." "I don't like being cornered either," she said softly, "especially not by liars in expensive suits." When Riley left the diner, she felt the air changing around her, not the weather, but the pressure. Like a system reaching critical mass, the truth was no longer a secret. It was a fuse, lit and burning. The next week unfolded like a high-stakes chess game where every move carried weight, and every silence a threat. Riley found herself caught between algebra assignments and sworn statements, her days split between grease-streaked wrenches and whispers of legal warfare. But for once, the shop didn't feel like a place of escape. It felt like a front line. Garrett Powell came through faster than anyone expected. 3 days after their diner meeting, he returned with a manila folder tucked beneath his coat and the haunted look of someone who'd just betrayed an oath, but for the right reason. Inside the folder were printed emails, internal memos, and transcribed call logs, all stamped with corporate letterheads and timestamps that matched Buck's memory to the minute. Cynthia Shore's name appeared over a dozen times. So did phrases like public perception control, containment strategy, and most damning of all, anonymous whistle tip to CPS submitted under advisory. Hank read it first, then slid the folder across the kitchen table to Elise, who didn't say a word for 3 full minutes. Then she whispered, "They built a paper trail and counted on no one ever finding the thread." "They didn't expect the girl to pull the thread herself," Riley said. By Friday, Elise had compiled a dossier of over 70 pages, combining Powell's intel with signed witness statements, character references from local officials, photos of Riley's safe working conditions, and background records of every safety certificate Hank had ever earned. Detective Kim Allen added her own notes, including prior interactions with the Caldwell legal team over unrelated labor disputes, and Pastor Neal agreed to hold a special town meeting, not at the church, but at the high school auditorium, to bring light to the issue. "They're not just coming for you anymore," Kim told Riley. "They're coming for what you represent. The idea that people without money, without degrees, without power, can still be competent and dangerous to the wrong kind of empire." Riley nodded, her voice quiet but fierce. "Then, let's make them afraid for the right reasons." The night of the town meeting, Fairpoint filled the high school auditorium like it was homecoming, and the roof was on fire. Farmers in overalls, mechanics with weathered hands, students, teachers, parents, a couple of out-of-towners with notebooks and press badges, drawn by the viral whisper of a 12-year-old mechanic caught in a storm larger than herself. Pastor Neal opened with a prayer. Elise presented the timeline. And Riley, dressed not in Sunday best but in her usual jeans, boots, and Stafford Auto t-shirt, stepped to the microphone and told her story. She spoke not with tears, but with conviction, about her dad, about Hank, about the day the Bentley rolled in and the world tilted sideways, about the pride she felt when she fixed that car, not because it belonged to someone powerful, but because she could, because knowledge shouldn't care where you come from, because skill had no age. And then she held up the photo, the one someone had taken the moment the Bentley purred back to life, her small hands raised in triumph, smudged with oil and joy. "This is what they wanted to bury," she said, "a girl doing what she loved, not because it was illegal, not because it was unsafe, but because it didn't fit their image." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was volcanic. By the time the meeting ended, 3 small newspapers had pledged to run the story. One independent podcast host from Ohio asked to interview her, and Elise had scheduled a formal meeting with the state's Department of Family and Community Services to not only defend Riley's case, but expose how powerful companies were exploiting the system to silence inconvenient truths. But the next day brought a reckoning. The official CPS report came back, and it wasn't favorable. Sandra Mitchell, perhaps under pressure of protocol, had cited concerning patterns and potential violations of child labor regulations, recommending that Riley be barred from working in the garage until a further investigation could be conducted. It wasn't an order, but it was enough. For a moment, silence took over the Stafford shop, a silence so loud it made Riley's breath catch. "I can't," she began, eyes wet for the first time in days. Hank laid a hand on her shoulder. "We don't stop. We pivot." Elise was already on her phone. "We appeal, immediately." "But that could take weeks," Riley whispered. "Months. Then we fight in the court of public opinion while we wait." The media came next, not in swarms, but in growing ripples. A journalist from the Rust Belt Times called. Then one from WRN-TV in Columbus. Elise coordinated everything, ensuring Riley was never exploited, never made into a circus act. She helped frame the narrative not as a kid versus corporation drama, but as a story about agency, community, and the forgotten heart of American industry. One morning, Riley sat in front of a camera crew on the garage's front steps, sunlight bouncing off her worn boots. "When did you know you were good at fixing things?" the reporter asked. "When I stopped trying to be good and just tried to understand," Riley said. "Machines are like people. They break down for a reason. If you listen close enough, they'll tell you what they need." "Why do you think some people want to stop you?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I remind them that not everything valuable wears a suit." The interview aired 2 nights later, and within hours, #Let Riley Work was trending on social media. Mechanics from across the country posted photos of their daughters with socket wrenches. Tech schools in Detroit, Minneapolis, and Reno sent messages of support. A retired engineer from Alabama even offered to fund Riley's future tuition, should she ever want to go pro. And then came the surprise. A call. Not from Elise, not from the media. From Nathan Caldwell himself. He arrived 2 days later, unannounced, standing awkwardly at the entrance to Stafford Auto in jeans and a windbreaker, flanked by no bodyguards, no entourage. Just a tall man with tired eyes and a heavy conscience. Hank met him with arms folded. "You've got a lot of nerve." "I didn't know," Nathan said. "About the report. About the campaign against you. I was told it was under control. That it had nothing to do with me." "Convenient ignorance," Hank muttered. Nathan turned to Riley. "I came to apologize and to ask what you need." Riley looked him over. "We need your company to stop using kids like me as threats instead of partners. We need you to fix the policies that let lawyers weaponize systems meant to protect us. And we need you to tell the truth. On record." Nathan's jaw flexed. "You're asking for a lot." "No," Riley said. "I'm asking for what's fair." He nodded slowly. "I'll make it right. But I want your help." Riley blinked. "My help?" "I want to build something different. A new program, scholarships, apprenticeships, mentorships. For kids like you, not as charity, as investment. You'll lead it, if you want." Riley glanced at Hank, whose expression was unreadable, then at Elise, who gave a tiny nod. She turned back to Nathan. "You'll let me write the first rule?" "Yes." She smiled. "Then make it this. Listen to the smallest voice in the room. It's probably the one telling the truth." And, just like that, the girl they tried to silence became the one writing the manual. It began with a knock, not just on the garage door, but on history itself. 2 weeks after Nathan Caldwell's visit, everything changed. Not in an explosion, not in a headline, but in the slow, deliberate way that real change always begins. With paperwork, with meetings, with a nameplate screwed into a clean office wall in a formerly abandoned vocational wing of Fairpoint Middle School. The plaque read, "Riley May Thomas, Youth Technical Advisor, Stafford Caldwell Apprenticeship Initiative." Riley stared at it for a full minute without blinking. The letters looked too official, too adult. But this time it wasn't a title given to her to placate or exploit. It was one she'd earned with every wrench twist, every smear of engine grease, every sleepless night waiting for the system to catch up to the truth. The program launched under cautious fanfare. Local news covered the ribbon cutting. Nathan Caldwell made a public statement alongside Elise and Hank, and Riley, clad in her Stafford Auto coveralls, stood quietly beside them, the only one not reading from a teleprompter. When it was her turn to speak, she simply said, "We fix what's broken. Not just engines, not just laws. People, too." And just like that, a ripple started. At first, the apprenticeship initiative accepted 10 students, 5 from Fairpoint, 5 from neighboring towns. Some were already interested in trade work. Others were kids like Riley had been, overlooked, underestimated, sometimes angry, always hungry for something more than what the school desks and standardized tests could offer. Each was assigned a mentor. Riley didn't just co-design the curriculum, she taught part of it, not from a podium, but on the shop floor. She introduced the students to timing chains and diagnostic readers, torque wrenches and transmission fluid, but also to dignity, curiosity, and the idea that failure wasn't fatal, it was just another kind of instruction. The students called her Coach R, and though she tried not to let it show, the nickname made something in her chest ache in the best way. Still, not everything was smooth. The second week, a student named Theo, who was brilliant with electronics but bristled at authority, nearly walked out after being criticized by one of the corporate reps overseeing compliance. "He treats us like robots," Theo snapped during lunch. "Like if we don't say yes, sir, we're defective." Riley didn't scold him. She sat beside him on the tailgate of an old Ford they'd been restoring and said, "You're not broken, but you can't fix a system by ghosting it. Stay. Fight it from the inside." He stayed. By the fourth week, 2 students had helped restore a donated ambulance and returned it to the county fire department. Another, a quiet girl named Juno, with burns on her arms from a kitchen fire at home, built her first working carburetor and cried when it didn't stall during testing. "It's the first thing in my life that ran when I asked it to," she whispered. And Riley? She was thriving and terrified. Because while she could lead in a garage, command tools and tasks with the ease of breath, public attention was different. Now she was the face of something bigger. The Caldwell Foundation wanted her to give a speech at a National Youth Summit in Chicago. Elise encouraged her. Hank supported her. Even Nathan said she could back out if it felt like too much. But Riley didn't want out. She just didn't want to be a symbol. The night before the summit, she lay awake in the hotel room staring at the ceiling. The speech she'd written was folded in her backpack, but it felt like someone else's words. Clean. Safe. Predictable. She thought about her dad, about what he would say. Probably something like, "Speak from your hands, kid. Say what you've touched, what you've built." So she rewrote the speech, by hand, with a pen, on hotel stationery. The next day, in front of hundreds of youth leaders, educators, and politicians, Riley stepped onto the stage and looked out over a sea of people who'd never heard of Fairpoint, who'd never set foot in a real garage, who'd probably never even changed a tire. And she told them everything. "I'm not here because I was lucky," she began. "I'm here because I was underestimated." She spoke of the Bentley, of CPS, of the silent hands that tried to erase her story, of Garrett Powell and Buck and Juno and Theo, of the beauty of being messy and greasy and loud, of the power of using your hands not just to build things but to rebuild hope. Then she said the thing no one expected. "I don't want to be a success story, because success sounds final. Like I've made it. I haven't. None of us have. We're still breaking bolts, still cracking casings, still figuring out which parts of ourselves need realignment. We are under construction, and that's not something to fix. That's something to honor." The applause didn't come all at once. It came in waves. Later that evening, Elise sat beside her on the edge of the fountain outside the conference center and said, "You scared the hell out of the board." "Good," Riley said. "They should be scared. It means they're listening." When they returned to Fairpoint, things didn't slow down. They accelerated. Nathan kept his word. He expanded the apprenticeship program statewide. Riley helped consult on similar initiatives in Indiana and Kentucky. Hank taught once a week at a nearby prison rehabilitation program for inmates interested in auto mechanics. Elise was hired full-time as the program director. And Riley? She still worked at the shop, still got grease under her fingernails, still walked Pastor Neil's dog every Saturday. But she also did interviews, wrote essays, and got accepted to speak at a TEDx event titled "The Youngest Hand in the Gearbox." And through it all, one question kept coming up. How does it feel to be the face of the movement? And she always said the same thing. "I'm not the face. I'm the hands, the grease, the noise when something's wrong, the silence when it's finally fixed." And when people asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she'd grin and say, "Exactly what I am, just taller." One afternoon, as she was finishing a tune-up on a hybrid SUV that belonged to the new mayor, Hank came out with a letter in his hand. "Mail came for you." She took it, wiped her fingers, and opened the envelope. It was a handwritten note from Sandra Mitchell. Riley, you were right. I saw the system from the inside so long I forgot how small it makes the outside feel. Thank you for reminding me what it's supposed to be about. Sincerely, Sandra. Riley folded it and tucked it into the wall above her workbench, next to her father's photo and a blueprint she'd sketched of a new suspension system for electric trucks. That night, as she locked up the shop, the sun setting behind her in strokes of copper and crimson, she paused at the door. The world had tried to reduce her to a headline, a risk, a child. But she had rewritten the script, not with a pen, but with torque, with patience, with everything her hands could hold and her heart could carry. The road ahead was still long, but now it was hers to pave. Autumn settled hard over Fairpoint. The maple leaves that once whispered above the garage now spun in cold copper spirals through the lot. Inside, the air buzzed with life. Compressors hissed, sockets clicked, and, over it all, Riley's voice called out torque specs to her newest mentee, Leland, a wiry 8th grader who never made eye contact but always tightened bolts with surgical precision. The Stafford Caldwell program had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 2 new shops were built in nearby counties. A national nonprofit offered backing. Schools that had once treated shop class like an afterthought were now asking Riley to consult. She had to start saying no, something she'd never imagined she'd do to opportunity. But with growth came growing pains and shadows. It started with a story. A national outlet published a flattering profile. Grease and Grace, the girl who rewired American grit. The cover photo showed Riley standing in the center of Stafford Auto with her arms crossed and the hood of a Rolls-Royce lifted behind her like wings. The article was warm, almost too warm. They made it sound like I'm some kind of savior, she muttered, tossing the magazine into the trash behind the oil drum. Like I did this alone. Hank wiped his hands on a towel. You didn't ask for that story. But people will believe it. Like this shop just fell out of the sky, and I'm the genius mechanic princess who blessed it with holy WD-40. You are a genius, he said gently, but not alone. You built it on shoulders. Riley looked at him. Then I want people to know whose shoulders. She asked Elise to call a meeting. That Friday, the shop cleared out at 7 p.m. Elise, Hank, Garrett Powell, Pastor Neil, Juno, Theo, Leland's parents, and even Buck Reynolds, all of them gathered in folding chairs surrounded by spark plugs and tire chains. Riley stood at the center, hands shaking but voice steady. We started this because someone tried to erase me, she said. Now they're trying to erase all of you. They're making me into a mascot. But this story, it belongs to all of us. Buck nodded. So what do? We write it ourselves. You mean a book? Elise asked. A record, a video series, a site, something that tells every story, every mentor, every student, every battle, every fix. Truth, not gloss. Garrett leaned forward. You know what that'll do, right? It'll make you more visible. The people who want you to stay in your corner won't like that. Riley looked him dead in the eyes. Then they'll see me in every corner. They named the project Under the Hood, Stories That Turned the Engine. Juno took the lead on graphics. Theo handled the video editing. Elise managed logistics. Riley interviewed people. Long form, unscripted, raw. She asked questions like, when did you feel like you mattered? What did your hands teach you? Who told you you weren't enough, and how did you prove them wrong? Each story they uploaded gained traction. Students from across the country submitted their own footage. Parents left comments about hope. Mechanics from towns Riley had never heard of started citing her as a reason they returned to trade work. But then the sabotage started. It began small. Emails mysteriously going missing, data files corrupted. Then came a denial from a major trade conference Riley was invited to speak at. The organizers didn't say why, only that concerns were raised about the political nature of her work. That same week, Hank found the shop's security camera offline. Someone had cut the wire, clean, professional. Nothing stolen, just watched. "Do you think it's someone from Caldwell?" Riley asked. Hank shook his head. "No, this is bigger." Elise backed him up. "I've seen this kind of pushback. You're not just challenging corporate tradition anymore, you're changing a national narrative. Some people are scared of what happens when the next Riley figures out she doesn't need permission." Garrett installed a new camera system. Pastor Neil brought over a retired deputy to sweep the place for bugs. Nothing turned up, but the message was clear. You're not just being noticed, you're being monitored. Riley didn't back down. She wrote op-eds, delivered speeches, met with legislators about vocational reform, and the more she spoke, the more the stories came flooding in, like fuel. One day, she got a letter, handwritten, no return address. "Your hands fixed an engine. Now they're fixing people. You don't know me, but I was going to drop out. And I watched you talk about failure, and it didn't feel like the end anymore. You saved me. I hope the world deserves you." She didn't cry. She didn't even blink. She went out back, picked up a rusted brake rotor, and started grinding it into a plaque. When she finished, it read, "You matter. Keep turning." They bolted it to the wall above the main bay, but nothing could prepare her for the next blow. At the quarterly review, Nathan Caldwell stepped away from the podium with tense shoulders. After months of being an ally, his voice trembled. "I regret to announce that several board members have decided to restructure our apprenticeship partnership." "What does that mean?" Elise asked sharply. "It means," he said slowly, "that effective next month, the Stafford Caldwell Initiative will be replaced by a corporate-run training center, with different oversight. Riley's role will be discontinued." The room went silent. Riley didn't shout, didn't cry. She just stood up, walked to the microphone, and said, "Let me get this straight. You're firing me from a program I built because it's working too well for the wrong people?" "It's not personal," Nathan replied, his eyes conflicted. "It's never personal," she said, "until someone like me refuses to sit down." Then she walked out, and something stunning happened. People followed. Theo, Juno, Buck, a half-dozen shop owners, 2 state reps who'd been quietly backing the program, even a reporter from WNTV who live-streamed the moment. They rallied. In 48 hours, a petition gained 80,000 signatures. 2 corporate sponsors dropped out of Caldwell's board. A regional paper ran an editorial. "You can fire a girl, but you can't fire a movement." Riley met with state officials and, with Elise's help, filed to register a new nonprofit, the Thomas Initiative. It would continue the work, on her terms. Hank donated the backlot to expand the garage. Garrett offered security training to any new chapters. Pastor Neil opened the church as a night school. Juno and Theo created a mobile app for students to learn trade basics from anywhere. And on the day the Caldwell building opened its doors to lukewarm fanfare and stiff suits, Riley wasn't there. She was 3 blocks away, leading 20 students in tearing down an old V8, hands black with oil, laughter spilling into the sky. That night, as the stars blinked open, she sat on the rooftop of Stafford Auto with a thermos of cocoa and her dad's photo in her lap. "Hey, Pop," she whispered. "They tried to shut me down. Thought I'd go quiet." She traced her fingers over the faded image of his smile. "But I'm not done. I'm just starting a louder engine." The first frost arrived quiet and silver, spreading across the garage roof like a soft warning. Seasons were changing, and so was everything else. It had been 5 months since Riley Thomas officially launched the Thomas Initiative. Long enough for its name to appear on banners, in state newsletters, and even once in a whispered conversation outside a Capitol Hill elevator, overheard by a senator who later called Elise to ask, "Is she really just 13? "She's 13, Elise replied, and already running circles around systems that took decades to build. But for Riley, none of it felt fast. Change, real change, moved like molasses in January. 1 student at a time. 1 permit at a time. 1 shop, 1 lesson, 1 breath. Still, it was happening. 17 chapters across 6 states, over 200 apprentices enrolled, 12 vocational scholarships funded, and 3 major universities had reached out, not just to study Riley's model, but to adapt it into their own systems. She should have been thrilled, and yet there were nights she lay awake staring at the crack in her bedroom ceiling, wondering what it was costing her. She missed movie nights, missed catching frogs in the creek behind the Stafford lot, missed calling Buck just to ask about random engine trivia, missed being a kid. One Saturday morning, she showed up at the shop before sunrise. Hank was already there, sipping burnt coffee and sketching out designs for a new hybrid engine block. He looked up as she entered. "Early bird?" "I couldn't sleep." "Too much on the mind or not enough?" "Both." Hank nodded, set his pen down. "Sit a minute." She did. The shop was quiet, soft in its half-light. For a moment she was 7 again, curled beside her dad's toolbox, dreaming about the world under hoods and behind gears. "You ever wish you could just stop?" she asked. Hank didn't answer right away. "I wish I could go back," he finally said. "Fix things I broke, say things I didn't. But stopping? Nah. You don't stop being who you are, Riles. You just find new ways to show it." She sighed. "I'm scared I'm going to burn out before I can even vote." "Then take a pit stop. Doesn't mean you quit the race." That afternoon, she did something she hadn't done in months. She left her phone behind and walked. No interviews, no press, just her, a hoodie, and the crunch of dead leaves beneath her boots. She ended up at the Fairpoint scrapyard, where it all started. The place where the Bentley first waited, rusting like royalty in exile. She found the car in its same spot, now marked by a rust plaque and a thick vine creeping across the bumper. It felt almost sacred, like a grave and a birth certificate all in one. She sat on the hood, breathing in the scent of motor oil, old steel, and time. That's when she saw him, Nathan Caldwell. He wasn't wearing a suit, just jeans, gloves, and a look of hesitation that didn't belong to a man worth billions. "Didn't think you'd come here," Riley said, not looking away from the car. "I wasn't sure you'd let me speak." She shrugged. "You've got a mouth. Speak." He took a breath. "I didn't fight hard enough for you. When the board turned cold, I froze. I chose silence because it was easier than losing everything I built." "Then you're not the builder you think you are," she said. He nodded. "Fair." Silence stretched between them like an exposed wire. "I want to help," he added. "Not through Caldwell Industries, just as a person, as someone who believes this is bigger than business." Riley looked at him then, really looked, and saw not a CEO, but a man who'd been cracked open by truth and finally decided not to tape himself back together. "Then prove it," she said. "I will." He did. 2 weeks later, Nathan donated personal land outside Columbus, acreage, tools, and seed money for a national headquarters of the Thomas Initiative. No red tape, no press release, just a handwritten deed and a note that read, "For whoever still dares to believe." Riley helped design the layout: open bays, solar-powered classrooms, rolling fields with converted buses for mobile shops. It wasn't just a training ground. It was a sanctuary, and it came just in time, because the storm returned. A leaked memo revealed that multiple lobbyists from legacy trade schools had been pressuring states to cut funding for non-traditional vocational programs, including Riley's. They argued the Thomas Initiative posed a destabilizing influence on the industry. "Destabilizing?" Theo scoffed. "We're literally fixing things." "They're scared," Elise said, "which means we're doing something right." But it wasn't enough to react. Riley wanted to lead. She called a summit. 3 weeks later, in the new open-air arena at the Columbus site, over 500 people gathered. Students, parents, mechanics, educators, mayors, even skeptical lawmakers who just came to watch. Riley didn't care why they came. She cared what they heard. She stood on the stage with her boots dusty and her voice calm. "We're not here to break the system," she began. We're here to open its hood and ask why it stopped caring." She spoke of Juno, now a licensed mechanic teaching in Louisville, of Theo, now building AI diagnostic tools, of her own dad, how his calloused hands taught her to believe in machines and in people. "We aren't threats," she said. "We're answers. You don't have to choose between tradition and progress. You just have to care enough to turn the key." The crowd rose to their feet. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was a rising. A month later, 2 major governors pledged full recognition of alternative vocational pathways. 3 states passed bills mandating student exposure to both academic and hands-on career tracks by 9th grade. Riley got a call from the White House press office. She didn't pick up, not out of disrespect, but because she was elbow-deep in a Chevy Impala's engine with a 10-year-old named Sasha who asked, "Do spark plugs have feelings?" And Riley, grinning, replied, "Only when they're ignored." Years passed. The plaque over the Bentley remained. New generations of students came through the shop, leaving handprints on the wall and hearts in the work. Riley grew taller, wiser, more tired, but never empty. One night, on the 5th anniversary of the Thomas Initiative, she sat on the rooftop of the Columbus facility beside Hank and Elise. The stars blinked overhead like loose bolts waiting to be tightened. "I used to think we were fixing the world," she said. "You are," Hank replied. "No," she smiled. "We're reminding it how to fix itself." Elise raised her glass. "To reminders that roar like engines." And they toasted, to hands, to heart, to heat, to hope. Because in the end, Riley Mae Thomas wasn't a child prodigy. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a trend. She was the click of ignition after silence. The hum after hopelessness. The girl who turned the key, not just on machines, but on a new way forward. Riley Mae Thomas's journey isn't just a story about engines or garages. It's a story about what happens when one person refuses to accept silence as a solution. It teaches us that age is never a barrier when purpose and conviction lead the way. Riley didn't wait to be chosen, approved, or certified to make a difference. She saw something broken, in a car, in a system, in people, and she chose to fix it, piece by piece. Her story reminds us that real leadership isn't loud or flashy. It's showing up every day. It's getting your hands dirty. It's standing firm when others try to rewrite your narrative. More than that, it shows us the power of community, the idea that no one changes the world alone. Riley had Hank, Elise, Juno, Theo, and an entire town behind her, and because of that, a spark became a movement. Whether you're a teacher, a parent, a student, or just someone trying to find your place, remember this: your hands hold more power than you think. You don't need permission to start. You just need purpose and the courage to keep turning even when the bolts are stuck. So, as you carry Riley's story with you, ask yourself, what needs fixing in your world? And what will you do about it? Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this powerful journey. We'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below so we can welcome you properly. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring, emotional stories like this one. Until next time, keep believing and keep turning the key.